breaking things that has ever happened into just one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life. So instead of reading 3 of my own poems, I'm going to read 2 of my own about friendship, because that's what this book's about, and I'm going to read the prologue, because the prologue is also amazingly written, also beautiful. Michael's texts are also beautiful. His emails are also beautiful. The way he talks is amazing. It's just great. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad you're all here and you're all here. So yeah, this is the prologue, and it just lit my heart up a wee bit. Ever feel like you were fated to be friends with someone? An alchemy in your meeting, instant fondness, part chemical, part kismet. This is how I felt about every friend I've fallen in love with, none so much as you. Now that you're gone, I want to talk to you more than I care to admit. I find ways to meander, and you bend conversations into stories with you at the yoke of them. While the friendships we forge inhabit us, there's no escaping that one day we'll be without them. They may go kindly with expected effervescence, or, as with you, ungentle and sudden. Either way, grief will come for the heart exposed, like hungry seabirds for a carcass washed ashore. The invisibility in missing you can be savage. Often it feels such extreme emotion should be worn as a sash or garish lanyard, visually obvious in a manner that commands attention, or at the very least, avoidance. Think a massive mottled bruise alluding to dramatics, or hair going grey from some horrendous fright. Other times, this couldn't be further from the truth, and the idea that people might bear witness to my grief is humiliating and abhorrent. I started writing this because I needed a way to keep talking to you, to honour then outlive the loss, and commemorate the impact you've had on me. It's how we stay together now we're torn apart. Like Ernest Hemingway said, write hard and clear about what hurts. We often spoke about finding our friends finding us, what I would chance to call the mathematics of male friendship, yet you were smarter and clearer about. Although I can't for the life of me remember how you worded it, because it was more of a feeling than a phrase. We mused on being older starters, the joy in having all this catching up to do, about preparing ourselves for loving and losing more friends than any other category of human relation, the mettle this takes. There was still so much I needed to share with you. This, my method of addressing that. This book, which started as a celebration of you and grew into a celebration of many friendships, perhaps all friendship. What began sweet and meek, yet more lurid than I hoped for, was soon striving to be a testimony of survival. Its list of ingredients, including heartwood and hidden lilacs, could you call it a paean to beauty? More tersely, it is composed from pain, rationalisation, miles and miles of walking, and long hours staring down the distance. Funny how missing you has me fishing through my own past, rummaging in the understory of my boyfriends, has me sculpting maxims and conjuring conclusions. If there is a day of reckoning ahead, above all else, I hope to be judged on the friendships I cherished and the love I invested in them. We're not getting you, my clever bastard, back, not as we know it, and I get that. Accepting the finality of this is a Herculean task, best buttressed by any means necessary. How else might we digest its massiveness? A beastly bite of grief where a friend should be is simply unacceptable. I really, really fucking miss you and must be getting on. Thanks. It's good to take the applause for your words. Thank you. So I'm going to read 2 of my own poems to start. It's almost embarrassing reading, it is embarrassing reading after Michael, because his language is obviously amazing, and that book, and he has taught me more words than I think my entire education in school did. So I'm going to read 2 poems with much less vocabulary in them. I hope you enjoy them nonetheless. So these are both about friendship, and I think if you are judged on your friends, you'll be judged very well, Michael. This is called Call on Me, and I wrote it when I was about 30, and I realised I didn't really get people, throwing stones at my window in a nice way, throwing stones at my window anymore, and I really missed the friends that just lived near me, and everyone has sort of moved away for work or partners or jobs, and I sort of wished I could, live with friends and that we'd stuck together a bit more. I'll just read them one after the other. Call on me, for all friends. We don't call on each other anymore. We all live too far away. And now impromptu visits worry you, might interrupt my day. You do not wake me up on weekends with screams pitched to my bedroom glass. Do not ring my doorbell more than once. Politer now, step off the mat. Now we must plan to meet in diaries, don't dance in PJs, share the beds. You do not comb my hair for hours to practice plaits, drink tea instead. I love you still, my friends. I count our meetings down like holidays, but dream each time the doorbell rings is you, just called to play. And this is the next one. I read that actually to a friend and she came round my house and threw a stone at my window. So it was quite helpful for me. This is called And it is for a friend of mine who borrowed my Garfield annual, which I loved when I was younger. And we've known each other since we were 5, and she gave it back to me 15 years later. So I was a bit annoyed with her, but I have forgiven her now. So yeah, I'll read this one and then I'll pass you on to the amazing Michael and Gemma. And you took a bite out of my birthday cake before Mum put the candles on, and I forgive you, my friend, because I love you. You gave my Garfield annual back 15 years after I lent you it, and I forgive you, my friend, because I love you. You got boobs before I did, which I assumed you'd done on purpose, but I was raging. But I forgive you, my friend. I hope you forgive me too. And I'm sorry I never thought how hard that was for you. And I'm sorry that I let you take the blame for the Malibu. And I'm sorry I never gave your two-tone jacket back, or the troll with the pink hair, or your point horror book. And I forgive you for your face when I told you I was pregnant. And I'm sorry that I did not make it to your wedding. And I forgive you for rarely remembering my birthday. And I'm so sorry I forgot your third kid's name again. And I forgive you, and I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, and I forgive you, and I love you, and I hope this never ends. Thank you. Enjoy the night.
How am I meant to talk now? Wow. I've just got a little bit of talking to do and then there'll be more. But welcome to the Boyfriend's launch at Portobello Bookshop. That was Hollie McNish. And I know that we have some reading from Michael Pedersen. I'm very excited.
So I thought I'd start by doing a little bit of reading. How's your crackling at the back there? Good. Yeah. It was applause in a digital form. So I'm going to read a couple of little bits to contextualise some of the earlier stuff of the book, which is a love letter to friendship, a sort of paean for those here, friends that are here, there and elsewhere, those friends that left the world before their time, those friends that we maybe just sort of socially, magnetically grew apart from, those friends that we don't understand why we don't see them as much as we want to, yet they're constantly sort of carried with us at different points in time. And I found myself doing this whole social audit almost, this scavenging to friendship, which sent me a lot of the time trailing back into my youth, which happened mostly around this area in Portobello. I went to the high school up the road, and the promenade and Arthur Seat and all this area was my old stomping ground. So I thought I would read a poem that related to Portobello in Portobello to kick off the show. Seemed geographically sensible. And a lot of the new poems I've got are sort of poems I tried to Trojan horse into a prose book by flattening them out a bit. But it turns out editors are at this level are very dexterous at spotting that. So they got weaked out quite quickly and quite rightly, and left me with a lot of poems that weren't quite companion pieces to the book, but definitely were in conversation with it a bit. So this first one's a love poem, but it's a love poem about two buildings. Two buildings in Scotland that I thought were two of the most beautiful buildings that drifted across the skyline. Now, Scotland disagreed. Scotland disagreed to such an extent that they labelled them eyesores and blew them up and took them down. So we were on different romantic paradigms there. One of those buildings was Kilkenzie Power Station. I know it's weird to write a love poem about a power station, but it was a great looking building at that point in time, and I was young enough to not realise all of the spume that it was kicking out into the world that was killing it. It just looked pretty industrially romantic. And the other one was Portobello High School. Now, not that new trendy one up there that looks like a sort of spaceship with portals and swimming pools. The old Portobello High School was this 8-storey tower block that looked out it came straight out of a Soviet dystopia movie. So yeah, and now that they're no longer marking the skyline, I guess this is a love poem to the ghosts that they leave across the top of Edinburgh. Kilkenzie Power Station's twin chimneys once stood 150 metres above the Preston Pans ice cream van. A coal-fired colossus, billowing clots of pewter cloud. Profane in its massiveness, Portobello High School marred the skyline. No plutocrat. It earned every inch of its staunch shadow. Porty's first partisan. From undefeatable gladiators flaunting weaponry to clapped-out greyhounds hiding a limp. When they blew up the power station, thousands revelled. Climbed hills, took to the beaches and boarded boats with picnics. Countdowns swelled, misfired, looped back. The beans kept jumping until, boom. First, fire dust rifled its gut like popping candy fed to the swans. Then the chimneys crumbled inwards, embraced like drunk friends, falling, laughing. We surveyed from a verdant summit, toasted it like hogmanay, snogged, watched again on YouTube with a soundscape in slow motion. Spectral voices mooing as the bricks unzipped, disappearing behind a powder. The last opal of smoke the dragon issued so it choke on its own ash. The high school met a more shameful demise. Stripped down in stages over an aeon, robbed of its cape, finger bones broken, gouged by metal claws until lower than a double-decker bus, loose wires fraying in wind, ugly is unfair grief, or the dignity of a tiger in a cage at a cocktail party, a crab launched at a rock. What happened to Merry Christmas? Tattooed on its brow by some brave bastard held out the window by their ankles. What happened to the bats guarding the greenhouse, the spider plants that crept going, though creosote black, fed only fag ends to the carrier bags, caught on pigeon wire like geese wrung by the neck to the slip in the middle of the stairwell down which objects and fluids like asteroids flew. Over 1,000 desks, extincted, all those names scraped into their pelts, manifestos, declarations. What happened to the cupboard the history teacher shagged a student in? Which definitely happened. Junior assured me. His sister even seen it. Junior with the lisp, who OD'd. What happened to Junior besides his dying to my first kiss, first punch, first balk at the ache of the bullied, yen for the far off, because we can't plan our hunger just where it takes us. Kilkenzie was handed a queen's sword to fall on. Portobello died a death of 1,000 cuts. I'm not saying I'd switch them. Who am I to condemn the heart of a heretic? It's enough to be here when they're not. There'll be one more. I feel weird to be reading sitting down. That doesn't normally happen. So if I was bouncing on the seat, there will not be any urinary accidents. I'm just trying to push a bit of the energy through. So I'm going to keep Porty-centric, Porty-zealotry. There is a section of the book that happens in Portobello, sort of nostalgically reflecting upon this area, and a little bit of it is actually set in this shop. So I thought it would be near criminal to turn up and not introduce the night by reading that little bit of it. Portobello's pinch of coastline along the Firth of Forth, peering off to Fife, carries something different now. No two looks into this sea will ever be the same since you left. I head off like the cell door has just been opened on a nostalgic rove along Portobello Promenade. Compared to 20 years ago, its ocean is cleaner and better swam in. The Turkish baths have been restored, and the French bulldog population is soaring. Apologies to any French bulldog owners in the room, of which I've no doubt there's a few. Very cute. The towering high school of my youth razed, replaced by a slick new building with much change afoot on the high street. It may soon merit the Guardian's Rio-like write-up. Thank you, Gemma. I'm reminded of a day back in 2014 when a sperm whale washed up at the Joppa end of Porty Beach. Rumour had it nicked in the neck by a ship's propeller and bled out. The friends I was with at the time, who dated back to school days, insisted we venture down to join the gawking crowds. Though uneasy, their alacrity trumped my reluctance, and off we shot before I could think of a better reason not to. No confusing where to head. A passel of lively spectators marked the spot like a fete. Beyond the corral of people, a motionless leviathan of marbled grey collapsed on the shallows and opened up. This was the first whale I'd seen in the flesh, blood like last light weeping out of it. The throng edged closer as both experts and gulls investigated its meat. This was Moby Dick, crossed with Orwell shooting an elephant. The whale, 30 tons of death, a lugubrious reminder even giants die. My phone pings as my friend Danny tries to check us in at The Carcass on Facebook. I exit the promenade and... Danny's not here, is he? I exit the promenade and take to Portobello High Street, where I stumble upon an evocative sight, Mike's tackle shop. Not just closed, but sold. I'm happy to see it changing hands and peer through the window, fully expecting to be sucked into a time warp. Mike's tackle shop was a popular lunchtime and after-school rendezvous for all the fishing aficionados in my year. I'd regularly be dragged there by boyfriends who could spend hours trawling the shelves, pawing at hooks and mallets and gaping at the framed pictures of champion fishermen. I did like the natural elements of fishing trips and its bonding opportunities, but the gathering of equipment and the showboating of prize catches was lost on me, as was the aggrandizing of the supposed manliness of the sport. The hunting element, the showing off of scars, the warlike tactics and building up the arsenal. For an epoch, in the late 90s and early noughties, these trips to the tackle shop became frequent pilgrimages. Alongside the nuisance of lost hours was the feigning of an interest in the stories of the elder huntsmen who lingered there, slow-moving tales of fish clobberings told with little panache. Nothing noxious, just a drawn-out affair of stifled emotionality. The visits to the tackle shop were rigmarole, burble that held me back from getting out into landscape. But yet, this mulling about in the shop was something the boys I knew did, a banal rite of passage. And I wanted to fit in, and I wanted to be included in the relatively few resulting outings. So there I was, as ensnared by this pesky ritual as the muckle fish in the photos that adorned the walls. Staring into the shop window, I consider how the notion of gone fishing serves as a trope for males flocking off with other males to steep in silence and address difficult matters. Fathers off fishing with sons, absolutely, but friends with friends foremost. It offers a safe haven to expose tenderness that wouldn't, to some shouldn't, come out under other circumstances. In this way, fishing trips are synonymous with male bonding, its nature, isolation and solitude made palatable by the banner of sport. Naturally, this was not the way for me, who was clumsily spilling out sentiment here, there and everywhere, in all the wrong places. I found these designated safe spaces to explore male sensitivity too staid, too slow and diluted, too few and far between. It didn't feel like the done thing growing up in Scotland in the 90s and noughties, but I couldn't do it any other way. I would tell my friends I loved them constantly, with humility, be soppy, undeterred by the rowl and rankle of others and my own trepidations. My friends and I, we hugged, we cried, we talked about fears and vulnerabilities. We were naked together. It's something that grew with time, and now I'm way past the point of noticing these behaviours may not fit politely into the algebra of most male friendship. With the friends I've lost, I regret not having done this more. The gone fishing trope is a pattern of behaviour now alien to me, the antithesis of the type of relationship I had with you. It took years of candour, bravery and heartache to break the constraints of my own thinking about male friendship and unlock a new mode of loving that empowers me still. Years, but worth every fumble and thrust. No apology for the slushiness. Why be pious to grief but not to love? I learned the sight of Mike's tackle shop will, in fact, coincidentally, or perhaps cosmically, soon become the Portobello Bookshop. A new, indie, word emporium indicative of the changing nature of the area. On discovering these plans, I hear the younger me lament Portobello Bookshop not being about when I was squandering my lunchtimes looking for hooks. More than this, my younger self extols new opportunities for the next generation of Porty dwellers. For a first bookshop in an area that's long been without one absolutely widens the scope for sentient relationships through reading groups, literary events, offer visits and encounters with curious humans. At a push, it has an occult magnetism. Where mallets once hung, poetry stacks the shelves.
You need to pick up your glass again, because I'm going to, wherever anyone is, whether you're watching online or you've got a drink of sorts or even a fist, it's time to fist pump or clink and congratulate Michael on the launch of his book, Boyfriends. Cheers! And to your friends and family that are here, that your
There's a lot
loved
of them.
ones.
There's a lot of them.
I'm just going to shout at your mum and say, you brought up a good one. You brought up a good one. Okay. The banter can come. It's going to happen. Also, I feel very privileged because I didn't know I was doing this until 2 days ago.
No, you did not. And
here I am.
thank you for being here. I knew you could handle it.
I mean, any time, Michael. So last night I was watching Kate Humble on her Coastal Paths. And this is random. We haven't discussed what was going to happen.
No, it's a surprising
I
start
wrote
to me.
one half page of notes. And she was talking somewhere beautiful down in Devon about how the poets of the Romantic era essentially spent their time bouncing about beautiful places and then encapsulated them in words. And I just suddenly thought about how lovely that would be, because I'm definitely trying it. I'm giving it a go. But then I thought about you, and I was like, are you a Renaissance romantic? Who, in the best way, if you can encapsulate it, because I hate this question, but we're friends. But are you a romantic?
So I definitely like bouncing around beautiful places and do a lot of bouncing and a lot of moving around. I feel like I'm constantly in motion. And I think I've always been drawn to love poetry in the most chance. Poetry started for me mainly in terms of complex apologies. You know, I would bugger up romantic situations and I would try and rewrite them in a sort of gooey, vehement, exuberant, emotion-filled love poetic form to show them how good it could have been if I wasn't such trepidatious, nervous fuck up in a lot of these situations. So the romance of poetry and romantic poetry was definitely the pull for me, the magnet of it all. And the more further it can take you, the more places that you find yourself in because of it, the more places I'll go. I'm a cheap ticket when it comes to an international literature festival or any sort of reading. I'll be there in a jiffy.
But
the bags are already packed.
I think as a sentiment, it's quite an important thing to investigate and to also talk about, because I think like writing it and boldly living and boldly loving, which comes through, you know, in this book so much. But I think it, like knowing you as a friend, you do live boldly. And I think that we are in a time where people societally find it quite difficult to live boldly. So I also find it like a very special thing to be able to just exude and to bring people together and to write it and to give people a language to live and love boldly.
Well, I guess that sort of bringing people together, that notion, I think that we've very much got in common, is what changed my life for me in some respects. Like I had before the more financially lucrative career of performance poetry kicked off, I had a hobby job and I actually used to be a lawyer down in London in the corporate game. So I was having to give that up to try and fight my way into literature, and the thing that made that possible was events and now Reekie, and was the live element. It was never going to be possible for me really quickly to just, you know, release a collection of poems and be a full-time writer. I had to find my way into it through a sociality, through a bringing people together, through the notion of events, through live words, and through the connectivity that creates from that perspective. So live literature and getting to know people in that really, I guess, vulnerable sense. Sometimes your new friends, you've read poems at them before you've really even had a conversation about where they're from, or if they've got any siblings, or if they're in love, or any of these questions. You almost in the poetry world give everything to someone so quickly that it's hard to then take a step back and showcase who you are from that perspective. So you have to, I guess, just be willing to be super. If you write the type of poetry I do, which is, you know, spilling out gooey sentiments here, there, and everywhere, sometimes too fast, too quickly, too clumsily, it's very hard to then take a step back. I had a really interesting conversation on The Verb, which was doing an episode about male friendship and masculinity, and there was somebody who'd written a book about a time a builder came into the room, and he felt the need to up his masculinity, so he put on a different accent. He pretended to be into like football and like tried to create this overly masculine dialogue to meet this person in the middle, culturally, where he felt in the middle ground that they met. But I had the same experience during lockdown, but the boiler guy came into the flat. But I mean, I've got David Hockney pictures on the wall. I've got little multicoloured lamp lights going on. There's a multicoloured throw on the couch. There's like weird illustrations of talking oysters on the wall. I've spilled myself over the room. There was no facade. It was like, live here on your own. It was like, So there was nobody I could throw it into. So it's like, right, we better just get into this, because there's no masking identity here. And I feel like that even just sometimes simple things, just even like the clothes I wear, socks or colours, or I mean, you don't have a haircut like this and not risk being touched in the urinals. You know, you've got to be. People want a little feel of the noggin, so you don't have.
I was just thinking when Hollie was talking, I was like, oh, hold up, like.
I mean, on the head.
Like who's got? I was like, who's got a bigger hairdo, you or Ryan? I think it might be you.
It fluctuates, I think, between us. Yeah. We both have our moments.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to talk to you about form briefly, because I don't think that things should be categorised too much. Having been someone who didn't go to uni personally, etc., like I'm very much just in the scrum of it. But in terms of for those that really like to understand what they're like perhaps buying or investing in. Like how important is form to you to move from poetry to something quite different? How would you describe Boyfriends as a piece of work?
Yeah, well, I steal Jackie Kay's blurb of it being a love letter to friendship. and go with that. I try and manoeuvre out of the biography or the memoir genre. I used to immediately recoil if someone said memoir, because I feel like there's a contention there, or a sort of superiority, like what has happened in your life that I should be learning from it. Of course, that's completely apocryphal, and it's really just people telling you their stories to see if you can project your own little bit of life into that and see if there's compassion or relation or even aggravation or contention or anything edifying you get out of it. But writing a prose book was entirely accidental for me. I was due to do a residency in Northern Ireland in a big building called the Curfew Tower, owned by an artist, Bill Drummond. And now Reekie were curating a whole year of residencies there. We got to send a different Scottish writer there every month. It's this beautiful seaside town, quite enchanting. A lot of Game of Thrones was filmed around there, so you get a lot of Game of Thrones buffs, and it's on the folk music tour. So I thought, well, as the curator, I should probably take one of the tougher months and you know, be more philanthropic with the offering. So I took the hard month of July in this seaside town with all these sailing clubs and barbecues. And I'd signed up to do that months and months in advance. And that was in July. And then I was going to go there to write a third poetry collection. And we lost Scott in May. And then the time from sort of mid-May till the start of July, because you're there for a few months, just almost like it was a lifetime in one respect, but it just disappeared in a breath take in another respect. And I sat down and I just couldn't really write poems, and it didn't seem to be coming out that way. So I thought I had to trick myself into writing in some form. So I'd do these little diaries about what I'd been up to in the Curfew Tower that day, and then I just started revisiting all of my favourite memories with Scott. Initially, the road trip we'd just been on really recently. I wanted to remember that in hyper detail. I wanted to relive it from that perspective, and I wanted to separate it from what came very shortly after this tragic ending, because it was 3 of the most sort of fun-filled, beautiful days of my life. So I wanted to be immersed in them and appreciate them and value them for what they were, regardless of what comes shortly after that in terms of its like more brutal juxtaposition. But after I did that, I didn't want to stop. I thought, well, rather than sitting and stewing in these more forlorn, sort of heavy, grief-stricken moments, why don't I just think of my 5 favourite moments with this individual and start writing about them? So all of a sudden I'm on these road trips in South Africa and in Jonathan's gallery and going on animal safaris and eating a lot. I mean, this friendship was filled with food. In a lot of perspectives. So I was revisiting some of my favourite meals and moments, and it just became this big scavenge. But I always intended to take this archive of friendship, this whole sort of life annal of friendship. I always have to make sure I don't say anal when I say annal, but now we've acknowledged the error you can make in language. This annal of friendship from that perspective.
I love the full giggle for that. It's great. That's good.
And I always intended to then manoeuvre it or manipulate it into a poetry collection. It was a document from which we were going to pull poems out of, and then it just refused. It was stubborn, it was obdurate, it wouldn't turn into a poetry collection. And then I thought, well, shit, this is a sort of prose book now. And it made it very difficult when it came to the edit, because it wasn't written with a narratorial arc, or it wasn't supposed to exist in that book form, to then try and turn it into a book which wouldn't be a very unpleasant experience for a reader because of all the timelines and all the chronologies of it all. So yeah, I wrote prose entirely by accident. So I can't say I sat down to do it. And I mean, I pushed the poeticness of it as far as the editor allowed me, and then if it turned into too much poems, they got booted out. I tried to Trojan horse them back in, and she very cannily spotted them, so there was a nice playful carousel that went on during the editorial process.
Would you say that you learn, not necessarily from the emotion side of grief, because there's a lot to be learned in that, but from the actual act of writing a book that you didn't expect to, working with an editor, like that cyclical relationship that you're describing, did you learn a lot? Because you're a super brain.
Absolutely, though, but I was...
Can you still learn? When you're a super brain? I don't know.
I was very, very much schooled and edified on the writing of it as a prose book. We had quite a few offers on the book. We met with a few different people, and the editor initially met Alexa. I was equally in awe of her as I was slightly terrified that I wouldn't be able to satisfy where she thought this book could go.
Okay.
So I was on a enamouring back fruit from the outset, and I knew other books she's edited with like a huge degree of dexterity. So in terms of writing prose, I felt like a complete novice from start to finish.
Well done all right.
We had about...
A super brain continues to learn, which we can all take away. I need to speak to you about food.
Yeah.
Because...
let's eat.
Yeah. And I know that, again, it's a theme. It's like a vein in terms of description of the friendship that you enjoyed with Scott, which I got to know you after you'd lost Scott. We'd definitely like known each other, but like we've become really like good mates, good friends.
Yeah.
And I love food being a conduit to describe connection.
Well, I think like we've definitely spoke about that. I've had the lots that came out of this book. I wasn't ready to stop writing it, so I just had to, because it opened up all of these conversations that I think were some of the most conducive, cathartic, zeitgeisty ones that I didn't think the book could reach a conclusion. So there was so many narratives that came out of it, and one of those beautiful things has been doing this series of events, Good Griefs. We all did one together at the book festival last year, and it was all about celebrating grief, and we talk about the different ways you can relate to people in grief, and one of them is to support people by poetry, other ones is to give people space, there's like family nurture, but a really important thing for me was actually to sit down at a table together, even when it's too tough to talk, even when you really don't want that sociality, to just be able to nurture someone by giving them a meal, be able to put sustenance into their body with no expectation or no regard. I think is such an important part of healing yourself through some of these more traumatic experiences that can physically beat you up as well as mentally at that point in time. So having lost a friendship, which was, I wouldn't say defined by eating together, but it was definitely one of its central veins, it just made no sense to me to then be starving myself or to not find my way back into the appetite on the other side of it. It felt disloyal to the memory of this human I loved not to be eating opulently. Oysters, all the seafood varieties, rich cheeses. It brought me closer together with the people I missed at that point in time. And there's just so many sexy food analogies you can get in the poetry world at the same time. Right, yeah.
And travel too. And like, again, it can be discussed in such a way, like the kind of adventure element, like the wanderlust or the connection or the sort of sticking together through travel. It can be really easily described through eating and drinking.
Yeah, I guess a lot of friends, especially friends I have in the arts world, they might be in bands or they might make films or stuff. So when we see each other, it's in these stolen moments in between. So sometimes you almost want to run away together just to have that space. It could be a big road trip. You could go on holiday together. You could arrange sort of like semi-gigs in places that turn into like holidays on the other side of it. So I loved this notion of having friendships by stolen moments because there was no force of habit there. You didn't have to be in the same room. You were really fighting to be together, to fight to be in each other's company from that perspective. And everything was earned and it was justified and it was all about pure joy. There was no need for you to be there other than to relish each other's company.
Beautiful. So I just want to know about the catharsis of, let's say, reading Boyfriends rather than, I mean, I've definitely found it cathartic, but the nature of the way that one passes, if brutal, as you say, it can just be so difficult to discuss, such a heavy feeling. And I think, you know, with the way that you and many people in this room like lost Scott, it can sometimes just be an untouchable zone for such a long time. Something that I can definitely relate to, having lost a really good friend, also in the public eye, in a similar way. And I think like this catharsis through somebody giving us like the language to explore grief as a whole, which is again relatable to all of us, is so special. And I really do want to thank you, like, from my heart for that. And like the work that you're putting in to do that on a bigger scale, from something like Good Grief, which we're doing at the book festival, which I'm so excited to do again, which we started bravely and scarily and intensely and beautifully last year. I just think that talking about grief, and from that kind of pure perspective of like, I've really had to go there with the way that I lost my best mate. Now let's fucking talk about it. And to write this, it's amazing. It's like, it's seismic.
Yeah.
And I just really do want to thank you. But also, I want to talk about the catharsis of discussing grief or reading about it.
It's such an unusual thing, isn't it? How trepidatious or how cautious we can be to approach this subject, which is perhaps one of the most universal subjects in the world. It's, you know, the opposite end of the spectrum of life. There's nobody that's not been affected by grief, that's not suffered it or isn't anticipating it or doesn't regularly think about it, yet we approach it so cautiously. Some dear friends are not ready to encounter other friends who've been through it, like they've got an aura around them. They'll cross the road, they'll avoid each other, they'll talk about anything but. But we all find our own emotional vocabularies into it as well. And I think if we do learn to think about it in a more jovial way and celebratory way, think about it before we have to, before it's all over us, before we're wearing it, before we feel it thrumming in our bones, like if we can speak about it in that more anticipatory or celebratory sense, because grief is just, you know, it's just the final stage of loving. We've got all this love to give someone, they're no longer there to put it into, and we don't know where to redirect these sort of sentient currents spilling out of us. They have to be recalibrated somewhere, or we lose them and we lose a part of ourselves, or they build up into something more hostile or more aggressive or more tangential or less relevant to our lives, that we then suffer from that. So actually being able to turn shock and pain and shame and desire into something joyful and celebratory, I think is in almost as near as we can get to having a superpower.
It's incredible.
Well said.
And also books, touching a book. Apparently, like, that's a rare thing these days. Yeah. And reading it page by page and considering it in like the solitude, but also the connection you have with literature, just so good. So nice, so calming, so soothing, and a lovely thing that not only can you do for yourself, particularly in a moment of feeling alone or suffering or trying to find words or understanding, but to perhaps buy one for somebody else at your, you know, like, books are so important in this discussion.
I think so, and I might even read a bit from one now.
Yes!
So, after talking about all that joyousness, I'm going to do a little free piece from the book, a 4-piece from the book. I'm going to call them 1 to 4, in that numerical fashion that has been popular in human civilization for a couple of hundred years and beyond. And it's not up for me to question it at this juncture in time. They're not in the book in that order, but they are being read to you in that order this evening. So they are in the book, I'm not lying to you. I know I'm reading them not from the book. It just saves the page flicking. And I've printed out the paper now, so I want to make sure it has its longest environmental life to justify having printed it. But I didn't want to wave sheets of paper around you. I had a lot of time to prepare for these events. I wanted to come out like a fucking pro. So I got a clipboard, racing red, with a sparkly Michael tattooed across its brow. Well, that's how they do it in the A game. And we've talked a lot about food, so we're going to start by eating.
Yes.
Now I'm going to stand up, if everyone's all right from that. Ooh, some camera action going on there. I'll stand down there to avoid, anticipatory falling or bumping into the light switch. Plus, you get a little bit of a closer glance at the clipboard that way, which I'm sure everyone's equally enthralled by as I am. In fact, at one of the readings, somebody waited an hour, must have been an hour in the queue. I was reading with Hollie, there was a lot of people there. There was about an hour in a queue, just asked me where I got the clipboard. I'm not telling. Unless you've bought 2 books. Then you can have it. 1. Dinner with you and Hollie. These are Palmery moments. No. I don't regret spending £75 on a seafood sharing platter. Aye, it's a crumb indulgent, and you call me a lush to Hollie's hilarity. But we are twinned in this bonhomie. I do not regret us gorging ourselves on a platter, boasting an estimated 40 mussels, 60 prawn tails, 6 gargantuan langoustines, 12 scallops, 18 oysters, and a heft of dipping bread. A platter most definitely intended for filling more than 2 bellies. Of course, there is wine. We would not do a meal such as this a disservice and be without it. The platter is its own constellation. It does not fit on the table, for its circumference is akin to Jupiter, not decommissioned Pluto. You and Hollie have to swap seats so as we can battle this formidable foe together in formation. We are leviathans, feasting with and on each other. The messy display attracts nods of reverence from onlookers populating the tables in orbit around us. These nods are a cloud of praise comfortably taken. This comfort in taking praise is far too rare for brilliant you. Over yonder, the island of Skye sits down to tea with us. We address it in stories and long glances cast over. On Google Maps, this water is labelled Inner Seas off the west coast of Scotland, Atlantic Ocean, a very formal name for our salty guest, the ghost at the table. Whilst eating the platter, there is a dearth of chatter. It has given way to unwavering dedication. Let it be known, this is not portentous. It is the opposite, the gooey vim of not needing chit-chat. We are apples, here's our core, sprouting pips in every belly. Even vegetarian Hollie sooks a mussel down. But shh, don't tell her family or she'll never hear the end of it. Sorry, Hollie. This supper was garlic butter gorgeous. Love on its tiptoes, the last meal we had together and one of your last on this whizzing planet. It isn't quite fit for purpose, but I surmise you'd chip in with Michael. It wasn't far off either. P.S. Yes, we ordered starters and all. But these were modest and too alluring to let pass by. The pudding you shared with Hollie was one step beyond for me, but yous looked cherubic splitting it, and you were often one step ahead. P.P.S. By the time the £149.50 plus £20 cash tip cleared from my bank account 2 days later, you had left us and something had left me. But right there, in that moment, we were brimful. It was love. Two, you can't be dead. Because we're still on holiday, because my brain is still processing the images of the last few days from short-term to long-term memories, and I've not yet shown anyone the pictures from our trip. I've not yet shown anyone the pictures from our trip because I'm not yet home from our trip, so you can't be dead. The ink is still wet on the page, so there's no way the book's gone up in flames. You can't be dead, because we are still mid-conversation on 100 relatively inconsequential things, and we're about to pick these conversations back up and finish the suckers off like we said we would, because your litter is still in the back of the car, because the moon is the same shape as the moon we feasted under, and there's rainwater in my hair from that sudden downpour that caught us out, and I've not yet emptied the sand out my shoes, and I'm still full of adrenaline from all the fun we had nor are having, and my face hasn't stopped throbbing from the laughter clouds we created, and there's that daft soft stain on my jeans yet to be washed out. You can't be dead, because I just got an email about our arrival time from Ullapool Book Festival, and I know the answer to that question, and I don't want to let them down. 3. Defying all science. Grief feels its hottest when newly lit, before it's even started smoking, before the birds know to stop singing and be forever silent, before the embargo on mooting a date for the funeral's been lifted, before one of my friends knows not to throw a strop because I haven't got back to his invite for a camping trip that needs the numbers, before any notion of talking in the past tense is fathomable, before Auden's poems Stop All the Clocks could possibly be about you. It feels like a drug that's newly entered the body and will deliberately dawdle in making the rounds. Inside like a virus, the flesh bullying itself, my vital organs like two best friends who've for no real reason fallen out, yet on account of their hubris will never find a way back. Grief dissects us into our most helpless matter. My bones carry an unnatural weight in them, as if the marrow is turning to lead. My gait too is off, like that bike with the bent wheel that required me to cycle like fuck just to make it to market less than 2 miles away. I am on the cusp of crying, ordering a cappuccino, but ask for chocolate sprinkles all the same because that's what I used to do, although I've no idea why, because I've never had a sweet tooth. I am desperate for touch, then offended by the suggestion. I find myself looking into my own eyes in every mirror I pass, eyes which have become bells that will not stop ringing until the jar cracks or the tongue falls out. Either way, it'll be over. It's been clumsy with meaning after having prided myself on exactitude, where 140 characters seems a stretch. It feels like I've had my last useful thought and now I'm salvaging ideas from the mulch. Time is standing still until it races by like a box with a bird in its belly. Mostly, I feel exhausted, slow and eddying, heavier whilst emptied of something I know will never be replenished, that I always will resent living without. I am heartbroken and coarse, whilst acutely thankful for all the wonderful, wonderful people around me. I feel important and guilty about it. I'm going to read one last wee bit, but I just want to say some thank yous. The book is just on its first run of being out there, and thank you first of all, contextually, to Portobello Bookshop, who have. I've been causing a bit of contention on these readings because I've been reading from this strawberry split purple edged edition of the book at all of the different events, and then none of the booksellers have had them afterwards. And I've had a lot of disappointed customers. At one point I had to colour someone's in with a pink highlighter because Portobello Bookshop is such a special place to me. It's such an incredible thing for this area and everyone that comes here, and there's such a brilliant community of people, and they've really been behind this book in such a beautiful and vehement and incredibly generous manner that they've got their own special pink framed edition of it that you can only get here. So thank you to those guys. Thank you, of course, to the publisher, Faber and Faber, to Alexa and my agent who signed the book and built it into what it is. It was very prickly to read at certain points of time. As I say, it would have been an unpleasant experience in the most part. And she very nicely crafted it into this incredible place. And then when it was ready to reach the world, Hannah came on board and helped me steer the ship on the final stages. And a young man that saw it through its entirety of its fruition, from as soon as you joined the company, basically. You were in on this book at those super early stages. We've met up loads of times. You've shared edits on it. You've slung all the most important people different copies of it. And young Mo has just been a real buoyant effect for every element of it. And there's too many brilliant friends in the room to thank them individually. The cover designer, the incredible John Gray, is here, that made it look as sexy and shiny and colourful and flourished as it is. Even if you've got a copy, buy another.
Yeah!
They make good gifts. Stop by anytime. Chances are I'll be thinking about you. Anytime I'm scared, anytime I'm angry, anytime I'm empty, anytime I'm rushing towards something I shouldn't be, anytime confronted by the verisimilitudes of ocean, anytime analysing sleep graphs on my sleep cycle app seeking the chance to compare data, anytime in Glasgow. I live in Glasgow. Anytime in a swimming pool dicking about, anytime there are new tattoos, anytime there's beard to scrunch, anytime drinking more than I ought to, anytime sad the morning after, anytime when in or moving between Cushendall and Cape Town, the Curfew Tower and the Grey Hotel, anytime carrying a guitar to share the load, anytime watching Game of Thrones or during the post-episode evaluations, anytime there are flowers by a roadside, such a ghastly beauty. Anytime I forget the details of a story only you can finish. Anytime giggling. Anytime on my future 37th birthday. Anytime Tom Petty lopes onto a speaker system. Anytime with smoked mussels. Every form of messy seafood. After all, oysters are best when part of a smorgasbord. Anytime upset by people's mean remarks, anytime Mahudi wine-lipped, anytime a song lyric rises up inside of me, anytime my dream or nightmare which comes so close together now, anytime an owl hoots to celebrate the evasion of an awkward encounter, anytime the phone rings, then stops at Christmas, anytime someone suggests a visit to a zoo in place of an animal safari, anytime someone compliments or chides my book, which is also now your book. Anytime stalking cats, holding back their purr. Sometimes when I'm snogging. Is that a little odd? Anytime. All the time. I need time. And you.